So welcome to Science Gallery Dublin. This event has been organised as part of Dublin Book Festival, which lots of events to check out as part of that festival and also as part of Science Gallery's regular programming. So I am Kate, I am a mediator at Science Gallery Dublin. I also study genetics here at Trinity College Dublin. And my colleague Ian, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hey everyone, my name is Ian and I'm also a mediator at Science Gallery Dublin. I actually study science communications and public health in Dublin City University, and I'm delighted to be here today. And I'd like to introduce our guest that we have today. This is Professor Luke O'Neill. Is a world-renowned immunologist and professor of biochemistry in the School of Biochemistry and Immunology at Trinity College Dublin. In 2016, he was made a Fellow of the Royal Society for his innovative work on the human immune system. He has a popular weekly slot on News Talk's Pat Kenny show and is an author of 2 best-selling books, and maybe a third, Humanology and the Great Irish Science Book for Children, also published by Gill Books. And today's discussion is about Luke's new book, Never Mind the Bollocks. Here's the science.
Well done, Ian. Great.
Yes.
You said the rude word.
Oh, sure. And actually, that kind of brings us on to maybe the first kind of the question I wanted to get. It's a very rock and roll title. Where did it come? Like, it's the Sex Pistols.
It is the Sex Pistols. Well, you're actually young to remember this. Have you heard of the Sex Pistols, Kate?
I have. Yeah.
Thank God for that. Well, the book was about science and how great science is and stuff, you know. Now the working title was "Science is Great." That was boring, you know. And then last Christmas, it suddenly came to me. Let's call it "Never Mind the Bollocks." Here's the science, because I realised writing the book, what science does is it defies nonsense, if you will, and fake news and all that kind of thing. Defies bollocks in the broadest sense, you know. And then I thought, well, that'd be a catchy title. I thought the publishers would say no. Yeah. And I did a mock-up of the cover, actually, based on the Sex Pistols cover. And I sent it to them, and they said, yes, oh, great, they're going to use that title. So, and I think that people like the title. It's strange, you know, people seem to be drawn to it for that reason. And in a bookshop, they saw it, you know, oh, that's an interesting book. So.
It's quite a bright colour. You can't really miss it. The actual cover itself, it's like quite striking.
Yeah, which is the Sex Pistols colours, by the way. So it's the same colours on the Sex Pistols.
No, it's I love the book. Kate and I we've been reading it the last few days, and it's like can't really put it down.
Thanks very much.
And it's kind of like every chapter. Like, how did you come up with like kind of what went into the book essentially?
Yeah, there were things that interested me really. You know, all those topics were always of interest. I'd read about them for years, kind of thing. You know, and then I began to put it together, and I probably got about 6 chapters initially. Like the one that really got me at first was vaccines, obviously. Now, of course, it's pre-COVID I wrote the book. I've been accused of capitalising on COVID. That's not true. Right? So I sent it in February, just when COVID was starting in a way. But of course, once the proofs came along in April, I had to put the COVID references in, and that vaccine chapter was the first one. And the purpose of the book is very simple. It's to say, this is what science tells us about these topics. And we can use science now to inform us and comfort us in a way. And then I did vaccines first. That was the first chapter I wrote, of course. I did men versus women. That's an intriguing topic, you know. That was it. And then gradually I built up the whole 15 chapters, I guess. But each topic was something that I was interested in. You know?
Yeah. Actually, one of the chapters, one of my favourite chapters, was a chapter about how people end up in jail. Yeah. And I was actually at a Point of Science talk that you were at, and you were actually talking about visiting the jail.
Yes.
And yeah, could you talk a little bit about that, maybe about how
that was the inspiration for that chapter in some ways. So, and a friend of mine called Chris McCormack, who I thank in the acknowledgements, he was the governor of Clover Hill Prison. He's retired now. I'd often discuss it with him about his job and the prisoners and all that. And then I was in Mount Joy. I gave a talk on humanology in Mountjoy. It must be about 2 years ago now, and it was a fantastic experience. So what happened there was there's a school in Mountjoy, obviously enough, and one of the teachers said that the men, as she called them, had read Humanology, some of them, and they wondered would I come in. And I did. I came in, and there was like 60 people in the room, and I gave a talk on Humanology, and it was probably the most rewarding part of that whole book because huge interest. Yeah. And one of them at the end said to me, "Luke, I've read your book 4 times. There's nothing else to do in here." That was quite good, you know? But it got me thinking, like, I could have been sitting there.
Yeah.
And then one of them could have been given the talk. How come my life ended up not being in jail, you see? So, and then I knew a bit about the science of criminology and is it genetic, is it environmental? And then that chapter kind of digs into why people commit crimes, I suppose.
I'm curious. I think that one of the interesting things about this chapter, and actually quite a lot of the questions in the book, is they're big questions, they're tough questions. And they're also questions for which there's been kind of a pre-existing discourse about in the public. So I think that one of the interesting things about the book is, I suppose, how do you go about approaching a question which has already been discussed, sometimes well and sometimes quite poorly, in other kind of media.
It was risky. In fact, a couple of times I almost stopped writing the book because I thought, this is a bit too serious, or it's too controversial, or it's too vast a topic. Yeah. There's separate books written about each chapter. And I'm thinking, this is stupid. I can't capture something in like a chapter that's so vast, you know? Like, look at the jail one. That's a whole area of psychology, you see. But in the end, I realised that people will be interested, you know, and I try to capture the key points. Now, I did a lot of research myself, of course. I dug into each topic. And because the science is preeminent, everything I say is backed up by science. So, in fact, it was a difficult enough book to write because I had to make sure there wasn't any bollocks. Let's put it that way. You know? So there's an extra pressure in that regard then, you know. Now you can read, like, I did read a very important book about criminology, so I kind of knew I was on the right track kind of thing, you see. But you're right that they're big topics. And my mission in some ways anyway, overall, is to say how science is great, anyway, right? But secondly, it's our friend, you see. And look at the crime problem, and can we use science to make things better, really, is what the book is actually about ultimately, and vaccination is a good example, euthanasia, another very controversial. All those topics are very serious and people worry about them, and they're in people's minds, society worries about them. So I'm trying to do mini reviews. In fact, one review of the book, thankfully most of the reviews have been positive. Someone said, this is like a compendium of little reviews about each topic that captures the essence of each topic. So that's really what I was trying to achieve there.
Yeah, I think that you've done so. I think that one of the things that's interesting about the book is it's not just kind of providing information in a really clear and accessible way. It's also kind of, in some ways, you mentioned this Hans Rosling and kind of his ideas about thinking about things, teaching people to think about things in a better way and help them digest new information they come across. So giving them the tools to go forward.
Yeah, if I'm honest, Kate, I'm ripping him off. That's true though. But Humanology was ripping off Yuval Harari to some extent. Those guys rip off other people anyway. Yeah. We're all borrowing off each other. Yeah. But Hans Rosling, I love him. I mean, he's exactly, he's sadly passed, with great statistician using numbers to provide information. Science needs data, you know. So you spotted that, well spotted, Kate. That's exactly the inspiration for those chapters as him. So have him as a presence behind each chapter in a way, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was just going back to the jail chapter for a sec. Could you tell us a little bit about the warrior gene?
Yes. Yeah. Well, that's controversial is the next thing to say.
We were just talking about it amongst geneticists.
Oh, I know. No, it's controversial. And I feel I made a slight mistake with that chapter. I should have made it clearer that if you read that as a lay person, the truth is that that's been controversial. Now there is evidence for it. Yeah. But the latest evidence would say, nah, not really, or at least it's not a huge thing. And certainly, and you would know this in spades, Kate, because it was the gene that was studied a huge amount, wasn't it?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So the early study did suggest there was a variant in this monoamine oxidase, and that linked into criminal behaviour. It took ages to reproduce that. Finally, it was reproduced in some studies, but it's not as big as they made out to begin with. Right. Let's put it that way. Okay, it still plays a role, but it's rare. But there are genetic associations. There's a genetic component in criminal behaviour, but it can't be definitive like you carry that gene. And in fact, I talk about that being used in court cases. Yeah. And they tried to say, that person had a variant in monoamine oxidase, so they committed that crime as a mitigator. And several trials actually brought it up as a possible mitigator that might decrease the sentence being imposed. It's too complicated, I think, really. But I suppose what I'd like to achieve with that is that there is very interesting efforts, to try to find genetic links into criminal behaviour. And maybe we'll find them. I mean, the other one is the depression chapter. There's so many genes linked into that. They all have tiny contributions, So it won't be the case that here's a gene and here's a complex trait. And in fact, science communication could be kicked for that for the last 20 years or so, because, and especially in the popular media, we all want it to be simple, don't we?
Yeah.
And it's not. That's the bottom line. But the Royer gene, I mean, you know, maybe it will come back. You never know if more studies are done. I don't know what Kate's opinion would be, but you would diss it entirely probably. But it exists in certain families, doesn't it? And there's something in it, but it's not as clear cut as, you know,
Exactly.
you carry that gene. What I liked about that as well, though, was if you impose an environmental pressure, then you reveal it.
Yeah.
And of course, the mantra now is, I'm ripping this off from someone else said this first. I think it was Matt Ridley or someone else. Nature via nurture.
Yes.
That's the key phrase now, isn't it? So I suppose that's what that says, isn't it?
It's an emerging area. And I think what's really interesting, you kind of said that these are like, you know, that's quite a controversial topic. But I think that actually it's a really valuable opportunity to look at kind of science in action, really, which you don't often see through science communication. I think it's all about, you know, telling a convincing story and we made this discovery and then it was settled. But, you know, that's not what it's like, really. And so it's interesting to see the progression of
the mistake I made, that maybe it was, I did research the Royer gene a lot, right? And for some reason missed the intense controversy around it. If I dug in a bit more, I would have had to have a page on that as well. So maybe in the next version I'll update that if you like, or correct it in a way. So.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that it's something that kind of that echoes through a lot of the chapters is kind of dealing with all of these like conflicting influences from popular culture, from scientific media. And one of the ones I found particularly interesting was the chapter on dieting, because I think the dieting is an area where pseudoscience or good science that, you know, maybe works in mice but was completely, you know, misextrapolated, it just runs rampant, and it has so many like real tangible effects on people's lives.
Yeah, exactly. And in fact, that chapter, each chapter kind of has a landmark publication I'm using as my foundation, right? And that one was this massive study done by Johns Hopkins where they looked at the science behind loads of diets and tried really hard to get the scientific basis, and all of them failed. In other words, there wasn't any scientific basis at all, except for two, as you may, the Weight Watchers one and Jenny Craig, those two. There is some science behind those. And I say, look, forget all the others, because they're not supported by science at all. These two kind of are. There's enough evidence to suggest that these two. And Johns Hopkins did it on purpose because GPs would want to recommend things to their patients, and they wanted to give the GPs a bit of scientific information to say, recommend these, you see. So, but again, it just shows you, what would you call it? Bad science, classic phrase, isn't it? And marginal effects and studies not done properly. So that was a good one, I think. You're right, Kate, to illustrate how science can be misused, in fact. Or things can be claimed and saying there's a scientific basis for it, and there isn't really. There might be a tiny basis. I think what happens there, by the way, is there might be a tiny piece of evidence, but that's not good enough to say this is definitive, So that kind of chapter touches on that. The other thing about that chapter was there is genetics in obesity, of course, and that's a real important finding. In other words, I talk about fat shaming, for instance. I think it's really important because so those kinds of elements I think were important to draw out as well.
Yeah, we talked about the fat shaming. You brought up the James Corden interview with Bill Maher.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
Why did you bring that up? Well,
do you know what happened there was that chapter I got a guy called Donald O'Shea to read it for me. Now he is a very eminent expert in obesity. I was clever. I got real experts to check each chapter for me, and he said, "Have you seen this James Corden stuff?" He called out Bill Maher for fat shaming. I got to mention that. And then also, Donald sent me a big article, like a statement by obesity specialists saying, stop doing fat shaming. It's absolutely useless, bullying people and all that kind of thing. This obesity is a serious problem. It's not being driven by sort of a lifestyle choice or a decision just not to be taking exercise. It's a lot more complex than that. And it's hard. It can be hardwired, So again, and that was a good one to spot in, because what I'd like to happen there is people who happen to have weight issues, they can get a bit of comfort from this and realise, look, I'm not going to, it's unfair to bully me, It's a big problem. It's real for so many people. There is a genetic aspect to it. There's behavioural stuff going on, So in other words, I hope to give people, again, a bit of comfort by reading that.
Yeah, I think it's kind of brought a bit of like relatability. Like that was when I heard of fat shaming, I immediately thought of actually that incident, and then you picked up on it.
Did you know about it?
Yeah,
I'd missed it. It was Donald put me on.
I was like, when you brought it up, it was like, oh my god, like it all kind of the penny dropped.
Yes.
And I think you're really good at kind of identifying stuff that's kind of relatable, and you also kind of really good at like bring your own story into some of the chapters.
Yes,
and one of the ones that really struck with me, and I think with the month that's in it with November, was about depression. The start of the chapter, you talked briefly about after your son's birth that you felt a bit depressed.
That's right.
But what I wanted to ask is like, that's quite like, to kind of put that into a book and have that vulnerability on a page. You know, and now people around Ireland and maybe around the world now are going to have that on their bookshelf.
Yeah.
Like, why did you decide to put
badge
that
of
in?
honour, badge of honour. Well, again, what happened there was specifically Humanology, my previous best-selling book, which was also in the Dublin Book Festival, although a couple of years ago. A friend of mine said, he liked it. You see, you can't be a good friend getting the diggage out. And he says, there isn't much of you in it. So they can hear my voice as they read it, but nothing about your own life or your own opinions on things don't really come out. And I thought this could make this one different, because obviously they said, the book, and you want to make it a bit different than the previous one and maybe see it as progress or whatever. So I realised was two things. One was to give a little snapshot of something from my own life in each chapter, and then come to my own bottom line. You know, each chapter has my own take on this topic, you see, and I thought that'd be quite good. And then the first chapter, the personal one, actually was about euthanasia, my father. And that's resonated with people as well. We might talk about that as well if you like. But then I got to the depression chapter and I said, what did I talk about here? Oh yeah, my own experience. And I think there's a couple of reasons to do it. One is it makes it more interesting, anyway, let's face it, and more vivid. But more importantly, it's to get the message out. The bottom line in that chapter is everybody can be susceptible. And there's help. That's really it. And I myself am evidence for that, you see.
Yes.
Now, of course, then I was a bit anxious, I must say, and I knew the media would jump on every interview I've done. They go into those two parts. So I knew I'd have to talk about it in public even more. And then again, I got a couple of friends to read it, and I said, what do you think? Is this self-serving? Is it a bit too close to the bone? No, this is the best part of the book. You know, so I said, you know, so I couldn't take it out that other way, you know. And I think it's so important. And of course, now the jump off of that chapter, by the way, the anchor publication was this survey of teenagers, where so many have depression and anxiety. It's outrageous, you know. And then I said, well, if I tell my story, it might help people who think, look, there's nothing to be frightened of here. It's very upsetting, of course, and challenging in all kinds of ways. The second thing I do there is I list all the people who were depressed who are my heroes, and it's a long list, you know. And again, the purpose of that is to normalise it. You know?
And he brought up Sting, and he wrote like that particular song, and he was like, no wonder he was.
Oh, that was a joke.
Yeah, I thought that was very funny.
I love Sting.
Yeah, I know. I mean, it was gas.
You can't beat a cheap joke with someone that's so expensive. So that's right. Yeah, but anybody who wrote Fields of Gold, it's not surprising on medication.
Yeah, it's hilarious.
That's right. But then my own story there, what happened there to me was my son was born and had a health scare. Now the health scare wasn't, in the end it wasn't serious, but for a while it could have been serious. And the double punch got me, you know, and I began to go into this state. And I knew, you see, 'cause there are criteria that say you've got depression, and if you tick several boxes, then you know you're in trouble. And I was ticking 3 or 4 boxes. Went to see my GP, got a bit of medication, got a bit of talk therapy. It wasn't so serious, I had to stop work, because depression can be extremely serious. So I was lucky in a way, it didn't really get really bad. But still, it was significant enough that I got some help, you know. And the message there is, if you feel these feelings, it means you're a human being. So whatever it is about people reading it going, oh, that guy was depressed, that's great. I don't mind at all, you know. In fact, as I say, it's amazing we all don't get depressed at some point in our lives, because life is tough, and especially if you're anyway ruminative. And we all overthink things, don't we? And it is a scandal that whatever society we've invented is making our young people depressed and anxious. I mean, how the hell could that have happened? You know, it's just a startling thing.
One of the things I wanted to ask about, like, first of all, like, this was my favourite chapter in the book, like. So, like, you know, it was the high point of the book was about the low points in life. That's the way, and the way I was kind of thinking about it was, and what I found really interesting was the link between depression and inflammation. Yeah, I couldn't believe it. Like, depression is the inflammation of the mind.
That's right.
Could you talk a little bit about that?
I'd love to, but then again, that was a jump off of that chapter. So I did a sabbatical in 2016 in GlaxoSmithKline in the UK, because I work with lots of companies for my research. And I met the head of psychiatry there, a guy called Ed Bullmore. And he was saying, I've got a new idea about depression, he says. Because, you see, if you're a psychiatrist, depression is still a real difficult thing to treat, and there's meds and all the rest, and these things work, of course they do. But they need new ways to get, it's the immune system. Well, that's interesting. I'm an immunologist, no. And then he begins to tell me this, and I said, good, fantastic. And then he wrote a book himself called The Inflamed Mind, and that's a really good book to read on this topic, by the way. So what you end up with there is, again, great science. Suggesting a possible new therapeutic, and it's simple in a way. So in times of COVID, we know this in spades. So when you get an infection, you feel depressed actually, and you crawl under the duvet. You don't want to meet people, social withdrawal. You tick all the boxes actually, and then you get over your infection. Now this is an evolved trait. The reason why you're becoming that way, it's called sickness behavior, is to get you away from the herd, to stop it spreading. Okay. So your behaviour changes, and you lie in your cave if it's a Stone Age or whatever, and then you don't infect everybody else, you get better, and then you're back in the community. And then Ed describes this very, very clearly, and he says the cytokines are being made by the immune system. And we knew, and my own research was doing some of this, cytokines will cause this behaviour change. And next thing then, the other big thing he describes is if you have an inflammatory disease, you're more prone to depression. Now they thought it was because your knees are sore or your skin is inflamed, that makes you feel low. It's not that, it's the cytokines are being made in excess in these autoimmune diseases, and they make you feel depressed, right? And they get this immediately, they blocked a cytokine in arthritis. It's a thing called TNF that causes arthritis. And they got a high. Within an hour or two, the people felt their mood lifting, long before the joints were better. So again, TNF was causing these symptoms in your brain. And that link between the immune system and the brain is a fascination anyway, and it's called neuroimmunology. It's a subpart of immunology, in fact. So in other words, you begin to get a scientific rationale now to target cytokines in depression, and that's what's happening. And if this works out, this will be the big breakthrough in 50 years for depression. We'll be targeting the immune system. And of course, neuroscientists would be going, that's amazing, because nobody would have thought the immune system is, at least say 10 years ago anyway, it was a radical idea, you know. So that was a good story to tell in a sense, because it's great science, and it might give rise to new therapy.
No, I thought it was fascinating. I loved it.
Yeah, I think that when you're talking about this idea of personal stories and contributing to it, I think that, as you mentioned, the chapter on euthanasia is another really good example of that, and not just a personal story about an issue that's kind of, depression is to a large extent maybe still taboo as a topic, but euthanasia is currently very hotly debated at the moment in Ireland. So how did that feel, I suppose, not kind of
that
sharing?
That was a fortuitous coincidence in a sense, Kate, because when I wrote that, I knew there were the Irish cases, remember, where people were kind of arrested for helping a loved one go to Switzerland and so. And that was I knew about that, and that was really awful for those people. But then in the last sort of 6 to 9 months, euthanasia is up, isn't it? And the Dáil is going to. In fact, I think they've just passed the law in New Zealand. Those countries are now confronting this, and I knew it was a really important topic because people are getting older, the ageing population. There are many people now who are really suffering. Now, what do we do? Do we allow euthanasia or not? Is it a humane thing to do? And then, of course, I go into the ins and outs of it. Now, that one would be less scientific probably than the other chapters because it's more about, public opinion and stuff like that, and the ethical aspects are discussed. So that was a danger because I'm straying away from science. Yeah. So that chapter is a bit of an outlier from the overall thrust of the science being helpful to us. But even still, I think it's such an important topic, and it's going to become more and more prominent in our society. And I kind of make the case for it in a way. And I finally, now I got 3 of my medical friends to read that chapter closely because they're in their day job, they're confronted by this the whole time. And they liked it and gave a few pointers, So the bottom line there is we need a better way of dying, is what the punchline is in a sense, because you can't have people in their 90s suffering for years. It's just terribly sort of cruel in a way, And so can we do it? And you need safeguards, of course. You don't want this running rampant either. So, and some countries like Belgium and Switzerland and so on, they're confronting it. The other thing to say about this is if we're adults, right? And if you're an adult, you should be able to discuss these things in a rational way and then hopefully use your reason to come to some kind of conclusion. And science is all about reason, let's face it. So that was the other kind of theme, I suppose, in that chapter.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that even if, as you said, even if you believe that this chapter is a little bit more kind of personal or ethical than, say, hard scientific, I think that it's a really interesting way to approach the question, especially in the last couple of years in Ireland. I think a lot of big questions in kind of social and political life have been really opened up by personal stories and personal discussions.
That's right, yeah. So, well, and the climate change chapter, just briefly on that, I got to have that one. Yeah. But you see, I think you're right, Kate. There's a theme here, sort of in the book, in that how do you inform people and how do you get people to become aware of something? Now, for decades, scientists were banging on about climate change and nobody was listening. And then Greta comes along, a teenage girl. And that resonated with people, not the science. Isn't it interesting? So there's something about how humans take in information, I suppose, and then respond to the information. And dry facts and scientific stuff, even though us as scientists, we love it, that mightn't work as well. So there's a way to do this in a sense. And the euthanasia chapter, it definitely sort of speaks to that because it's such an emotive thing, isn't it, in a way? And again, the other purpose is to make the book readable. So when I bring in... like the euthanasia chapter, I talk about Christian de Duve, and he's a big hero.
That was I was going to ask. Yeah, to talk about him, I think it was a great story to bring.
Well, I knew him.
Yeah.
He came to Trinity back in 1993 to a conference he organised. Now, he's very famous for discovering the lysosome. And you both have heard of lysosomes, to be honest. And that they won the Nobel Prize for that. And then he got into his 90s. He was terminal. He said, to hell with this, I'm going to just go for it. And then he made sure to tell all his friends and make sure his family could turn up. And it was a lovely way to go, him and his wife, actually, together. I'm going, that's a good story in a way, you know, and because he was suffering hugely, you see. So again, I thought that was a good way to illustrate this, that a scientist decided to go down that road, I suppose. Yeah.
And then you also closed it with your father as well.
Yeah, exactly.
It was one of the best chapters in the book.
Right.
What I was going to say is, like, we've kind of like, what we wanted to do is actually just have a surprise question round.
Oh no!
Yeah.
Right, go on.
So
ready.
I know we've kind of dealt with like depression, euthanasia, and we wanted to kind of lighten the mood a little
Great.
even more.
I'm happy to hear that.
So we wanted to do like a quick kind of rapid fire. We're going to give you like two options, and which one you gravitate towards.
Right.
So the first one is Barry's or lines.
Oh God! Now that's.
Oh no! Yeah, we're literally. They're very like.
Is there a scientific?
These are kind of get to a little bit. Kind of give it a kind of a better background of kind of Luke O'Neill, how he
Barry's obviously.
Barry's.
Oh God, yeah. I always got Barry's tea. Well, you insult the people of Cork if you didn't say that one.
That's controversial.
I think so. Another question we have, which is a little bit more, scientific in nature, is which is more of a kind of a personal achievement for you? Would it be something like publishing a paper in Nature or publishing a best-selling science book?
Neither.
Oh, really?
Well, you've got to be careful with these things, haven't you, Kate? Both are remarkably satisfying, actually. Because a lot of work. I mean, to get a Nature paper is the biggest thrill for any scientist, as you probably both know, and it takes a huge amount of effort and pain and suffering and all the rest of it. So to achieve that, climbing Everest in a way. And then the other good thing about a Nature paper is everybody reads it. You see, and the reason why you publish, remember, is to be read on both counts. So in other words, if you make a scientific discovery, you want to get it out there, the people read it and they develop it. There's no point in hiding it away, you know. And then if a Nature paper, everybody sees it and then that might inspire them. Same, I want people to read me books, don't I? Because that might help them as well. So they're very similar in a way. Yeah. If I was forced to pick one over the other, it'd have to be the Nature paper. Because I am first and foremost a scientist and I want to make discoveries. And if you make a discovery that's really important, you might get it into Nature, you know. So I'd go for the Nature. But on the other hand, if you don't get a Nature paper, it doesn't mean you're not a great scientist either. So you got to be careful with these things, you know.
That's a good answer.
Bit of a controversial one. Pat Kenny or Ryan Tubridy, or maybe like radio.
Oh, no, that's
TV.
a bit personal.
I know.
They're both wonderful people.
Yes, yes.
I mean, we're blessed in Ireland actually with media. Call them that if you like people and so on. And I've got a lot of the heroes in the media. Claire Byrne is fantastic, for instance. And I'm very fond of her. What gets me about her as well is, and to mention all of them in a way, they know science, you know, and they've got they've got good literacy in science, which is tremendous. And Pat, it has to be Pat though, because he was an engineer, you see. So our conversations are very easy because he's got a scientific background himself. And he's been very good to me, so I'd have to pick him. But equally, Ryan, very good communicator. They're both fantastic people, I think. And as I say, we're blessed in Ireland. I think we're also blessed in Ireland, but even in the general public, there's a good level of literacy in science as well, which other countries mightn't have. And I've noticed this, especially with the COVID thing. The appetite is huge. And the questions I get are very well informed, you know, from lay people. It's great to see that, isn't it? So we're lucky in that regard. And both of those, Ryan and Pat, they both champion science a lot, remember. You'll see them talking about scientific things a lot in their respective shows and so on. That's a great thing, isn't it?
The next question, I suppose, maybe a little bit apt at this time as we're looking forward to things that we're going to be able to do in the future, is playing with your band or going to the pub with friends.
Oh God, that's another tough one. Gee, these are hard questions. I can't answer that. I'll have to think for a minute. They're both great. Let's start with that. I'm dodging the questions off there. Both fantastic. Probably the band. Yeah, because you can't be getting in the zone. Let's put it that way. You know?
Yeah.
And when we do a good gig, it's a great thrill. And again, it's just being with them. Actually, it's like a gang, you know, and we're all together and then we rehearse and we try to master these songs and all the rest of it. So I suppose the band would have to come first. Going to the pub is great crack as well, obviously. Which I missed a lot of, but the band is great fun. And then the band, remember, is a mixture of scientists and medics as well. So there's a bit of a sciencey angle to it too. So I'd prefer that over the pub.
Keeping on the musical team,
Yep.
Sex Pistols, and I think they're in the book, they use a Talking Heads quote. So I'm going to say Sex Pistols over Talking Heads.
Talking Heads.
Great answer.
That's an easy one.
Oh.
I love the Sex Pistols because they were just so explosively fantastic at the time. But you wouldn't be playing that album every day, would you? In a sense, it's a bit too in your face, kind of. David Byrne is a bloody genius.
Amazing.
I think he's such a fantastic musician. Bit quirky, very intellectual. I like that part of what he does as well, So now to be Talking Heads.
In a similar musical vein, McCartney or Lennon?
Lennon. Yeah, I have no hesitation there. Although, mind you, as I've got older, I gravitate more towards McCartney, strangely. And of course, it's an unfair question because it was the double act that made them great. It was 50-50 really that made them so fantastic, But Lennon was always the one for me because he was so honest, you see. And not that McCartney was dishonest, but Lennon's songs really are deep on it, like Help, one example anyway. And the other thing was a bit more intellectual, like some of the lyrics are just crazy, like I Am the Walrus. The absurdity of Lennon, his lyrics was like Monty Python in a way, Now, but McCartney, on the other hand, fantastic musician, great songwriter, a lot of depth with his stuff as well. Eleanor Rigby would stand out, though that's mainly McCartney, so it's a tough one. But if I was forced to, I'd pick Lennon. Now, although let me keep going, we could talk about this the rest of the day, but McCartney, Band on the Run is a fantastic album. McCartney bet him as a solo artist, you see, but when they're in the Beatles together, Lennon would slightly edge him.
Interesting.
Another one. So I know you're from Bray,
Yep.
I think. So Bray to Greystones or Greystones to Bray?
Jesus, you guys have worked hard on these questions.
I'll tell you now, that was...
Bray to Greystones,
TripAdvisor
Greystones to
here.
Bray. It'd have to be Bray to Greystones because it's a day out, isn't it? It's great fun, and all that kind of thing. And then I'd walk on the cliff walk down instead, probably then go by Dart. But let's go for Bray to Greystones.
And the final question, in our attempt to kind of introduce ourselves to the world of immunology, despite the fact that we're both outside it, is B cells or T cells?
Oh God, that's a great question. Neither. I'm a macrophage guy. Let's get that straight.
Okay.
Now you see, T and B cells are about the adaptive response. Now, don't get me wrong. I do love them. They're very important. But I'm a macrophage guy. You see, I have to say neither. That's a good answer, isn't it?
Absolutely. Very good.
Yeah, I'm more an innate immunologist, you see, because we work on macrophages, whereas my great colleague Kingston Mills, he's more adaptive. So we work together, of course, but no, I'd go for the macrophage.
Absolutely. So I suppose now that our conversation has been broken up a little bit by our quick fire round, I'm going to actually circle back to something that you mentioned just before the quick fire round that I was particularly interested in, which was this whole idea of climate change and climate activism. So as you quite rightly said, and it's kind of a really interesting theme in this chapter in the book, that essentially the science has not progressed dramatically in the space of time between when we first became aware of this situation and the large-scale activism that's happening now. So why are Extinction Rebellion, Fridays for Future, why are they so successful now?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, the two big topics in the book, actually the vaccine one and the climate change one, because in my opinion, they're the two most pressing things that we confront as a species. Now, COVID will go away, remember, but this goddamn climate change is like the massive elephant in the room. I saw a good cartoon, actually, of two doctors saying, we've cracked COVID, what next? And there's a massive monster behind it, and that's climate change. So it's such a serious and very important topic. Now, the science still goes on. I mean, the evidence, and just like vaccines to some extent, if you can't be like an anti-vaxxer anymore, you're a vaccine denier. It's like the Holocaust because the science is so strong. Same with climate change. It's driven by human activity. We have to stop doing certain things to save Earth. And in the last few years, it's people like Greta Thunberg and all those. In other words, it seems to have shifted a bit towards the younger generation, let's put it that way. They've got more galvanized behind it. And that's a great thing, isn't it? Let's face it, you see. And because it really affects them. The big, and I discuss it in the chapter, Kate, as you probably spot, I mean, how do you keep the thing going? Any movement lasts about 3 years and then peters. That's a terribly depressing thing, but everything peters out. And that's because there's not one or two people leading, they get fed up, So the big issue now is how do we keep it going? How do we keep the climate change, the campaign, if you will, alive? And you're right, it's been going on for years. I mean, Greenpeace has been around for decades, you see. So I don't know, what would it take? I mean, the dreaded Americans remember that and what they've been doing. Let's hope that changes today or tomorrow.
Yeah.
But that was very unhelpful, you know. So we just got to keep banging the drum, I suppose. And the data can't get any stronger. Let's put it that way. I mean, the data is absolutely compelling. So, and it is in the right direction. Again, in that chapter, I talk about the hopeful stuff. You know, the way we're having wind energy, renewables, consciousness is obviously up in people. Industry is responding in various ways. There may be a technological solution, but we have to solve this, as we all agree, you know, because if it keeps going the way it is, 50 years from now, it's going to be a really different planet, and surely we owe it to the next generation to keep on this one. And hopefully Greta will keep going. I mean, and maybe the next generation will come up and drive it forward, I suppose. But it's a very difficult one, isn't it? Because how do you keep a campaign alive is the question, I suppose.
I think especially with these kind of youth-led movements, that I think you're quite right to point out that it's great to see a movement with such energy and such youth. But I think that sometimes there's a tendency to kind of say, well, you know, good on them, go for them. But if we don't get the rest of the people on side, then I mean that's a huge
It's a very
challenge.
complicated thing, in fact, and I discussed it in that chapter. It's been another good. It's not in the book, but you know, remember the marriage referendum? I mean, that was very well done in the end. The way they approached that, using personal stories, tremendous campaign. It's like a model of a campaign, actually, because the big question is, how do you get people to change? Now, my book is trying to say, use science to get them to see this, and then they might change. Now, the American administration is ignoring all the science. What do you do then? You know, a rebellion is needed of some kind. I'm not advocating violence or anything. Change comes through different means. We'll need something new, though, Kate, because it will begin to wind down a bit, and then the next generation might go, I want something new, you know, something new to approach. I suspect the key driver here will be climate disasters will keep coming, you know, the whole time. And that will shake people out of their complacency, maybe. But it's such an important topic. And again, no doubt about it, the science behind this is so tremendous. Like NASA led the way in many ways with our Earth imaging technologies, the ice core evidence, all that stuff adds up, you know, into this great scientific basis. We need something more now, don't we, though, to convince people as well.
Absolutely. I think particularly at the moment, you know, talking about how these kind of movements really rely on momentum to sustain them, that at the moment when the whole world is kind of on pause, yes, it provides us an opportunity to see what the world kind of looks like when we stop doing a lot of things, but also maybe it kind of diverts people's attention from this other massive existential crisis that we're facing.
The problem here, by the way, is it's like smoking and cancer. That took a long time. Like, you would smoke a cigarette and you would think, I'm not going to get cancer, and if I do, it'll be 30 years from now. You know, there wasn't any immediate effect. Same with climate change. And the personal story is the bins in the front of my house and me putting things in the wrong bin. And I said, who would have thought that the front in climate change is coloured bins outside your house? You know, this kind of thing, you know. But we need to have all these measures really in place to help the problem, I suppose.
Yeah, it was such a relatable thing that people could just get straight away. Climate change right in front of your house.
Yeah, that's right, exactly. Well, it was a personal thing, because my wife digs into me for you put the thing in the wrong bin there. Yeah. You know, who'd have thought my action would damage the planet today?
Speaking of new things and being hopeful, the last chapter, the future, talking about, like, you know, where science is going to be and the trajectory of science. Like, what are you most hopeful about? And I suppose about vaccines, I suppose, with right now.
Yes.
Being hopeful about COVID.
Well, there's an overarching hope in the sense that we can keep using science in a way that will help society in all these issues and beyond, you know. And I'm hoping that will continue. And again, remember, what science actually is about in a single sort of sentence is it's to allow reasonable people to look at stuff and then make a decision, really, you know. So you could be someone who says, I don't believe that the earth is round, okay? You show them the evidence, and they still don't believe you. You can't do much with that, you know. And every topic in the book is a bit like that. So I'm hoping for the future that science will continue to help us. Now, remember, it's a multinational, huge campaign, science, all over the world. There are hundreds of thousands of scientists. And all of them are making little discoveries that will be useful. And immunology is the most pressing example that we have at the moment. You know? But equally, any branch of science is going to be useful in this regard. So I'm hopeful that science will continue to deliver for humanity, let's put it that way. In the immediate term, the vaccine, clearly we're in the middle of this damn COVID thing, and I've no doubt that science will crack that disease and the vaccines will emerge. And the therapies as well, because that's my area more than vaccines. So you've got plan A and plan B there in a way. The other thing I'd hope for in the future will the dreaded climate change thing we've discussed already. Let's hope that science begins to help us there. And if we get, say, you know, proper sort of power sources that aren't based on fossil fuels, all that stuff, you would hope, and that is delivering as we speak. Ultimately, though, I think the big thing for me would be new medicines for definite, because There's so much suffering in the world because of medical issues. And medical research is massively important and making massive strides. And they're more than the pair of you. I mean, if you do genetics or any part of sort of biology, that's driving medical advances the whole time, remember. So I'm hopeful that we'll have better ways to treat disease in the future.
You're really good at actually making complex science really easy, and you're really famous for your analogies. Do you get a kick out of coming up with analogies?
It's a risky in it as well, remember, because you can sometimes do stupid analogies. And analogies, some scientists are annoyed by them because that's not real, that's not a good way to do it. And if you're an immunologist, you're always talking about wars and the invader and the T cells, they are frontline defenders, all that kind of thing.
Classics.
But I think it's so important because again, first of all, people can understand what you're talking about more. And then they might remember it. So analogies are so important. So when I get a good one, I think I'm always quite satisfied. I can come up with one that actually seems to resonate with people. But there's a risk of dumbing it down too much, remember. So it's a bit of a knife-edge thing. But certainly people often remember the scientific fact through an analogy, and it's very useful in that regard.
We're coming towards the end, and I know there might be a few science writers tuning into this. And one of the things I wanted to ask, if you were to give advice to someone to write their own popular science book, what would it be?
Go for it. It's the first thing. Never be frightened is the first thing I would say. Because when I began writing humanology, my first book, it was tough to get going, to be honest. And I give credit to Jess Kelly in News Talk because she would give me little words of encouragement, which was really wonderful, because I can't be bothered, it's too hard, I'll keep going, she'd say, So I thank her in humanology for that reason. Just give it a go, and don't be frightened. And remember, it can be so satisfying. So sometimes you'd write a page, you go, wow, that's really good, that's connecting. That's sometimes you'd write a page that's disastrous. You'd have to scratch it and do it again, kind of thing. But and remember, it's satisfying because you're ordering your thoughts, you're trying to capture something complex in a way that people might like. If you can bring a bit of humour in or the popular culture references, that makes it even more satisfying. So my advice overall is, if you're anyway interested in this, give it a go and stick at it then once you get started, I suppose. And remember, great feedback. People say to me, oh, I like it, thanks, thank you a lot. That's not that you're doing it for praise necessarily, but it's nice if someone says, oh, that really made me understand something.
You reached out to so many people to kind of proofread your chapters, and even that the acknowledgement at the start shows you the amount of people that you were in contact to check out that what you're writing is correct.
Yeah, that's the fact checking as well, Ian, because remember, the whole purpose of the book is to say, this is real, this is true. And that was a kind of a checks and balances thing partly, but also to get a bit of input from people and never be ashamed to ask for help either, I suppose, is the other message I would give people. But it can be tremendously rewarding, and remember, it's so important because the general public are paying our wages often through their grants and so on. Of course we should inform them about these things. And then you might fail first, the usual thing. It might be, mightn't be as good as you might think, but if you stick at it, you'll definitely get somewhere.
I think we might leave it with that today.
Yep.
It's a good note to end on for the Dublin Book Festival.
Yeah, that's right. Here's my advice: buy my book.
Yes.
And learn, and then you might write your own book. Or get it for free from someone else.
Exactly. Well, without further ado, I just want to say thanks very much, Luke, for joining us today, and Kate.
Thanks to the pair of you, that was great. Thanks a million, guys. Great questions.
And this has been Science Gallery on behalf of the Dublin Book Festival. I just want to say, if you do want to check out more about Science Gallery, tune into the dublin.sciencegallery.com and check out our Instagram and our social media channels. We always have events coming up, but without further ado, see you now.
Thanks very much, guys. It was great.